All right, we have got a lot to cover today, so let's go ahead and get this party started. Everybody, welcome to Classics 160D2, Classical Mythology! And today's lecture 7.3 on Euripides' Bacchae, more into the world of Dionysus. So, let's see what we got on the docket today. A few announcements. I'll talk a little bit about the exam. Then I'm going to finish off talking a little bit about Dionysus, in particular with the mysteries of Dionysus. I promise TAs I will take no more than 9 more minutes, and then the world is yours. I know I go over that every time, and then you guys have to like crunch everything you do into like tiny little bits that you had planned for much, much more. 11:10, 8 minutes to go now. The world is yours. You got the rest of it. After I do that, Matt's going to talk a little bit about feedback on the research proposal drafts. Then Colin is going to go into the wonderful world of archaeology and tell us about Greek theaters. Julianne is going to talk about how that relates to Dionysus. And then Darcy will talk about the official kind of festivals and rituals associated with Dionysus at the Dionysian festivals, both the one in the city and the one in the country. And then last but certainly not least, Katie will tell us about this week's reading, Euripides' Bacchae. So, announcements and recap. You guys know all this. Put it in speaker view. You can see me. You can see the notes. Email somebody who's not talking. They'll be able to respond to you. Midterm exam next Friday the 16th. Now, the exam itself, right, we've talked a little bit about this week. 25 multiple choice questions, 2 points each. That's half the exam. 1 essay question, 50 points. Lots of points. Write a really good essay. That's worth the other half of the exam. The essay questions, the possible essay questions are up on D2L now. So if you go to today's, I think it's under today, go to Friday, October 16th, you should be able to download a list of 12 possible essay questions. One of those will be the one that you get on the exam, all right? So everybody has the opportunity to do fabulous on this essay if you put in the work ahead of time, right? My suggestion would be to sit down and kind of outline each of them. If you're feeling lucky and you're like, I know which one Dr. Rob's gonna pick, go ahead and write that one out ahead of time. Whatever works best for you, but those are there for your use. Put some work into it because we're gonna be expecting a lot on it. In terms of the exam itself, you don't have to show up to Zoom or anything like that. The whole thing takes place on D2L. It starts at 11 a.m. sharp next Friday. If you have accommodations, request those through the DRC, and those will be input on like Monday or Tuesday of next week. Okay, back to Dionysus really quick, right? We talked about the birth. We got tiny little baby Dionysus, right, coming out of Zeus's leg. Zeus was being a good father and rescued him from the fire, right? He was being a not so good husband, being a kind of good father. Question about reading response due before the exam. There shouldn't be a reading response next week. If there is, I'll cancel it, but no reading response for next week. We also saw a second version of the birth of Dionysus. This one in the Orphic tradition. And in this one, he gets like dismembered and then put back together. And that dismemberment comes back with the story of the Bacchae, and in particular, King Pentheus. And then we talked about how he was growing up, right? He was hiding from Hera, and then he was kind of cursed with this madness that made him wander all over the world, in particular into Phrygia, eventually all the way to India. And that's why when you see him, he's frequently on like a leopard or something like that. And then when he comes back to Greece, he brings the beautiful gift of wine. Although the story doesn't start out so beautiful, right? Because he gives it to this guy, Icarius. Icarius gives it to his friends. They all pass out. The families of those guys end up killing Icarius. Then his daughter finds him dead and she kills herself. A pretty bloody mess to start with the beginning of wine in Greece. And then we talked about the Anthesteria, right? One of the main festivals associated with Dionysus, a 3-day-long festival where each day is named after one of these vessels, right? The Pythos in day 1, the Oinakoi, or the Koes in day 2, and then the Kitri, or the Kitroi in day 3. And each one of those things has to do with the opening of the wine, then the drinking of the wine, and then when that's happening, it's also kind of like the opening of the spirits into the world. And on the last day, those spirits are placated by the final offering of grain and honey and sent back down into the underworld. Now, on that final day of the Anthesteria, one of the things that we get is this kind of symbolic marriage, right? This kind of ritual marriage, and some of it's thought to be between Dionysus and Ariadne. Now, later in the course, you're going to realize that Ariadne is the daughter of King Minos of Crete, of Knossos, and we end up seeing there that she is the one who helps Theseus, basically gives him that little ball of string so that he can find his way down in to fight the Minotaur and then get back out. And afterwards, Theseus and Ariadne sail away across the Mediterranean to a wonderful life together. And they end up on the beautiful island of Naxos, and it's completely delightful until Theseus is just like, smell you later, I'm out of here, you can stay on the island. And he leaves to go back home. Of course, he forgets to put up the white sails. But he just leaves Ariadne behind. Not cool, dude. But things end up well for Ariadne. Eventually, she has two gods fighting over her. So she's got Glaucus, this kind of minor sea god, as well as Dionysus, the god of wine. They're both fighting over Ariadne. Classic beachfront fight. Dionysus ends up kind of entangling him in these vines, and then she and Dionysus end up together in a beautiful marriage. And then they have tiny little baby kids, and eventually Dionysus places this wedding crown on Ariadne, and that becomes in the sky the constellation Corona Borealis. Now this brings us to the issue of drinking wine in general, right? And you can't talk about drinking wine in ancient Greece without the Symposium. And this is this kind of male-only kind of social event that would take place in a particular part of the ancient Greek house, and it's basically elite men getting together, drinking a bunch of wine with prostitutes, playing some music, and talking about, like, you know, deep world affairs. Maybe you guys can associate this, right? You have a couple glasses of wine, you think you know everything about the world, you talk about that, and the goal is to get, like, kind of drunk, but not too drunk. But very frequently in ancient Greece, everybody gets way too drunk. There are all kinds of stories about them drinking way too much, wandering out on the street to fight people afterwards, that sort of thing. But yeah, the Symposium, one of the kind of key social events involved in drinking in ancient Greece. Now, when you drink in those, right, we talked a little bit about this. What you do is you have the wine in this crater, right? You mix it up in there, and then you fill your little wine glass known as the kylix here. And then that's what you drink out of, right? A very large, shallow cup. And then what you do at the end, after you finish your cup of wine, is you play this drinking game, known as Kotobos. And what this is you have these little dregs in your wine glass, and you're supposed to flick them at a target, right? Sometimes like a little thing floating in the wine in the center. And the idea is that like the person to hit the target or the person to sink the little thing in the crater of wine wins the game. So think of it like an ancient version of beer pong. And we have lots of depictions of this here. Okay, so when it comes to wine, right, it can both turn men very thoughtful, right, thinking about the world, the right way to act in the world, but then also turn people into satyrs who get drunk and horny and belligerent and all that stuff. All right. Finally. All right, I'm going to go over by 2 minutes, TAs. My bad. We got to talk about the Villa of the Mysteries and the mystery cult of Dionysus. So we talked about the mystery cult of Demeter, right? And how people process down to Piraeus and then all the way over to Eleusis and then go inside the Telesterion. Dionysus has his own mystery cult. But this one is far more mysterious because we have less people writing about it. And in large part, our knowledge of it comes from archaeological remains. So these mystery cults, right, just as a reminder, they're not attached to a particular city. You have to be initiated to join. You can still be parts of all sorts of other religions. And then at the end, there's some sort of initiation process or some sort of secret activity or knowledge or something like that revealed to you. Now, our knowledge for the mystery cult of Dionysus in large part comes from the site of Pompeii. And in particular, the building that you're looking at here, known as the Villa of the Mysteries, named after this one very, very famous fresco that sort of visually depicts what's going on with the mysteries of Dionysus. Now, what you're looking at here is the depiction itself. So it's in one room in the villa, and you can see it's this massive thing that goes basically floor to ceiling. And what we're looking at is the initiate here, who's going through a series of steps. So we can see the initiate bringing over some sort of cakes. We can see her kind of later on preparing something at the table here. As we move forward, we can see her with her kind of like, her, what do you call it? I don't know. Robe being thrown over her head. And then things start to get dark in the bottom register as we move on to another wall here. So here we can see Dionysus, or almost see him. He's like blocked out, but we can tell it's Dionysus, both from things like the masks over here, and Silenus, kind of a little minor deity associated with Dionysus, and then the Theseus, right? His staff with the kind of vines growing out of the top of it. And now this is where things start to turn really dark. So now we see the initiate down here somehow being whipped by this like person wearing wings, or some sort of divinity wearing wings. Again, we don't know exactly what's going on with that, but this is part of the initiation process. And then finally on the other edge over here, right, we can see the result where she's kind of been whipped. She's now sitting on some sort of chair, something like that, and she has now taken her place as an initiate into the cult of Dionysus. So there aren't particular steps, right? We don't know exactly what those kind of steps are. As archaeologists, we're giving our best guess based on these kind of archaeological remains, right? We don't have the specific wording to go along with it like we do with some parts of the mysteries of Demeter. So, Villa of the Mysteries at Pompeii, our best evidence for the mystery cult of Dionysus. So, with that, all right, I went 3 minutes over. My bad, Matt. Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you. You got feedback on the midterms. Tell our wonderful students how they did, how they can improve, and all eyes on Matt.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. All right, so we're going to get this PowerPoint up. Let's take a look at it. All right. Cool. So I'm just going to be giving some tips and tricks about how to improve that proposal draft. Things that all the TAs saw we talked about, and what y'all can do to improve it. So for some people, well, there's a lot of maybes. So yeah, it's just so one of the things we saw that was some people they're telling a story. They're telling like the story of what they're kind of talking about. Less summary. So we know the stories, and we know you know the stories. So we want to hear your voices. We want to hear what you think and what your project is going to be about. Also, it is not an essay. While we want it kind of in that essay format of multiple paragraphs, you don't need to argue the entire thing. We just want to know, what your project is going to be about, what sources you're using, how it's going to look, and make sure that y'all are looking at the assignment sheet and the guidelines and seeing what that should all include. So also another thing that we all noticed was focusing in on a specific thing. There were a few topics that were a little broad, and just basically, just focus in. If you have a topic like Trojan War, ask a question or look at a specific part of it. So let's say that you're interested in the Trojan War and you're also interested in warfare or like soldiers. And so you could take a look, let's break that down and look at that. And then you ask questions about it. So why are one-on-one battles so important? And then you can talk about that and use other sources. Yeah. For kind of things like grammar and writing and stuff, one thing that really helps me is reading it back to myself. I write a sentence and then I read it back to myself. If it sounds wonky to me, then I'm like, okay, I need to change it up. Also have a friend look at it. Sometimes our eyes, we're so used to writing it, we can't see it, but other people may. And then also I would suggest everybody schedule an appointment with the Writing Center. They can help you, kind of clean it up, make it look nice. They give you advice on how to write, kind of how to write well. All right, let's go to the next slide. Cool. So another thing we saw was secondary sources. Some people kind of aren't including them, and some people are including ones that, while may be helpful, can be kind of sketchy to use. So kind of have here the difference in what you kind of should be looking for with what you kind of shouldn't be, or using at least. So just kind of initial Google search on the bottom left here. It's good for, that initial phase. Like you want to know what story Perseus is in, what book. Wikipedia is a good place to just find the initial information. Okay, I found my source. Found my, where I need to look. So you go to that primary source. You go to Apollodorus. You go to Hesiod. Secondary sources. You need to use things. What was really helpful is using things like Google Scholar or JSTOR. These are going to have good scholarly articles that help you kind of form your ideas, and also it's other people doing research, kind of arguing similar things, and they can help you see different parts of the text or different parts of the ideas that may be helpful to you, that may strengthen your own topic, your own project. So that's kind of the basic thing. Places to avoid is websites just like randomly off of Google.coms, .orgs. While they can have good and helpful information, a lot of times it is hard to confirm that information without heavy research. Scholarly articles are very usually cited, and so that if you see something that looks wonky to you, you can usually follow their train of thought and find what they're talking about. All right, so that's all I've got. Remember to email your TAs if you have any more questions, if you need more help. We're always here to help. So, yeah.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Matt. That was really great. Again, please reach out to us. We want to help you, and we would love to talk about your topics more. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the archaeology of ancient theaters, specifically the theater, or rather the sanctuary of Dionysus, and the theater and sanctuary of Epidaurus. So what are we looking at? Rocks. But to the archaeologists like me, Dr. Rob, rocks are great. And we love when rocks are serrated and coarse and that they actually mean something. So when you are attending an archaeological site, like this is, again, right at the archaeological park of the Acropolis, you have to use your imagination to fill in the gaps of what actually could have been there. Because seeing the outlines of stones like this, where we see we're actually in the precinct of the sanctuary of Dionysus, that doesn't really mean anything to us unless you've studied it or you have an understanding of what's going on about the site. So one of the important things to remember about the archaeology of theaters is that they were sanctuaries first and theaters second. So that means is that there was a temple on site to these to specific god. And in this case, the sanctuary of Dionysus, as you guessed it, it is to our main man, Dionysus, god of wine. All right. So here we are looking at going towards the Acropolis, and this is one of the main entrances. So we can see that the theater is right behind this stone wall, and it's going into the hillside, actually. And this is actually a common feature of ancient Greek theaters as opposed to Roman theaters, is that the Greeks love building into the hillsides, and they have these naturally beautiful looking spaces that go way up into the hill or mountain. So we can see that the Theater of Dionysus here, it's actually kind of a mishmash of archaeology. So the floor was more Roman, but the theater that we knew it as itself was made into about the 5th century, and then comes to fruition later into like the 4th, 5th century with marble, everything. I mean, this place would have been bedazzled in marble. So we're looking at the side here of what would have been about the stage and then the backstage. So the stage, you see my cursor, would have been where, like, roughly where this is, where the umbrella is. So one question that that comes up often is, well, you have all this marble and you have all the parts, why not rebuild it? In this case, it's better to give a general approximation of what areas and archaeological sites would have looked like than try to do a whole scale replication, because then you say, well, do we try to build for the 2nd century Roman theater? Do we try to build the 5th century BC Greek theater? So kind of giving a general approximation makes the most sense. So we can see here more of the theater's relationship with the Acropolis. And so as it was going up, so where my cursor is, we can imagine that there would have been wooden benches going all the way up to the top. And we have these columns and this little cave at the top. These would have been monuments dedicated by people who wrote the best play that year. It's kind of cool. A nice little bragging right of what you did. So we're getting another sense of the scale. We can see how, looking down from top of the Acropolis, this was a massive place. The Theater of Dionysus would have fit about 17,000 people, not a small venue. So it's always important to remember a theater like this in context, in its surroundings, because it's never just the theater. So we can look at A at the bottom here, and the red I marks out the beginning of the sanctuary. Sanctuaries were not to be trifled with. If you did anything that would have especially ruined the gods or like insulted the gods, or especially the temple, God forbid, that would be immediate grounds for some sort of punishment or trial. But the the sanctuary temple of Dionysus, we have the small one, and then we have the larger one that was constructed in the Neronian era, so about 60s AD. B is just giving you the general area of the sanctuary. C, this is showing you where the orchestra is, and yes, we use that word in modern theaters, but the orchestra is where the chorus would have been, not where the actors would have been. The actors would have been on the stage here, where we see where it's pointing to E. And then something that's kind of peculiar is that we have the Asclepion going with F here. So the presence of Asclepion, like, okay, we know that there's the ancient god Asclepius, the god of medicine. So what is he doing there? Well, let's recap a little bit about the Theater of Dionysus, Sanctuary of Dionysus, and then we'll get into that. So as we said, it is all about the temple. The temple is the most important part of the sanctuary. And so what we'd seen today, originally constructed in the 6th century, and then the smaller one would have been given a rebuilding effort about 350. And unfortunately, there's not much of the temples remaining. The theater, as we know it, would have been in the giant fan shape, about 530 BCE, and marble everything. And originally it would have been some sort of funky wooden rectangle, very different from what we think about. And the epithet that is given to the theater is Dionysus Eleutherius, Dionysus the Liberator, from a city called Eleutheria. So the Asclepion is built next to the theater about 420, 419 BCE. And Asclepions, they were known for their springs and healing qualities. So usually what would happen is you go to the spring, drink some water, consult with the priest, maybe take some hallucinogenic drugs, have a nice nap, and then the god would come to you in a dream. What a great time. And after that, these Asclepions must have been really popular and worked, because people would leave stone offerings of the body parts that were healed. And we'd seen the photo here. This is one from Epidaurus, which we'll get to in a second. But someone was thanking Asclepius for fixing their ears. And there are thousands of offerings to the god. So for various body parts, hands, breasts, head, arms, something was working here, and made people come back. Okay, the Theater of Epidaurus. This is one of the coolest places in all of the ancient world. To give you a sense of scale, so it would have taken about, depending on how wealthy you were, about 1.5 to 3 days to get from Athens to here. If you're going from Rome to Epidaurus, you would have taken about 7 to 18 days. It was not a quick trip at all. So some perspective here is my professor in the blue. She's about 5'4", and so you can get a sense of the enormity of this place. It's one of my favorite photos. Just shows how big and just massive and gorgeous the area was. And again, the Theater of Epidaurus was put into the hillside here. And one of the unique features of Greek theaters is that they have perfect acoustics. So we did the thing where we would run up and down into the middle of this marble oval. We whispered, we dropped a penny, and you could hear it perfectly across the area. It is rather incredible. And this is due to the architecture of the seating, where apparently the way the seats are arranged, they would have buffered the sound going up. So all the sound from the audience would have been softened, and thus the sound from the orchestra down here would have been raised. But again, we see that but Epidaurus is not just known for its theater, but it's also known more as a healing center and therapeutic center. So we see this reconstruction. We have the Temple of Asclepius, where you would have hung out, maybe taken a bath, consulted with the priest, made your offerings. Then you take a nice little nap in the Abaton with the drugs, and you would have been on your merry little way. So the Theater of Epidaurus has a substantial history of being associated with healing from about 2000 BCE. Asclepius, god of medicine, comes in about the 6th century, and it's known as a therapeutic center. So I would like you guys to think about, what is the connection between theater and medicine? Why is this a thing? So some of the ideas that, Some of the ideas is that theater is actually a way to connect into the soul, and that you are learning about you're learning about yourself, this emotional mental health, and how you are physically like having these out of body experiences. We don't think of theater in this way today. Someone going to see a show like Hamilton might love the soundtrack and get into the spirit of the show, but are you going to be called to action to do something after that, maybe change your life? Greek theater and medicine had these ideas intertwined, where if you were watching a play, that you would take the lessons learned from this experience and apply it to your life in the real world. So the Theater of Epidaurus, as we know it, in that lovely fan shape, gets its form in about the 4th century BCE, has the perfect acoustics, and continued until the 5th century CE. And even nowadays, it still hosts performances. So theaters, the connection between theater and medicine, these are things not to be trifled with, and they did work. Alrighty, thank you so much. I am going to kick it over to the next person. Ooh, come on.
I believe that is me. The slides haven't changed yet for me. I don't know if you all still see for me, they're still on Sanctuary of Epidaurus. Perfect. Here we go. Dionysus and theater. Okay, so why do we even talk about the connection between Dionysus and theater? What is it? Well, I mean, in addition to being the god of wine, Dionysus is also the god of theater. He's also the god of masks and impersonation, which kind of go in with theater, especially because in ancient Greek theater, I mean, you had your comedy and your tragedy, and they would wear masks for both, and different masks depending on which one it was. But so it's all kind of tied together, and it does kind of make sense if you think about Dionysus and the other things that he's in charge of. He's the god of wine, and so he does kind of have this sense of the things that Dionysus is in charge of kind of transcends boundaries. I mean, when you drink wine, you kind of you're loosened up a little bit. You kind of almost transcend into another form of yourself. It's really a subversion of the normal. So it does make sense that Dionysus would be the god of plays and kind of like what Colin was just talking about, the significance of plays in antiquity and taking on that separate character, the impersonation. You also kind of have Dionysus is known for kind of like being out of your mind, especially, I mean, you guys read part of Euripides' Bacchae for today, and Katie's going to talk a little bit more about it. And so you kind of see there again that Dionysus is known for really getting out of yourself. And so it makes sense that he would be god of theater. And as such, a bunch of the major festivals for Dionysus involved theater and theater competition. So two main ones were Linnaea and Dionysia. And actually for Dionysia, there was two different ones, a rural and a city one, which Darcy will talk about here in a couple minutes. So I'll save that for her. But with the Linnaea, you would have, it was a festival to Dionysus that would often take place in January or February. And so you had, with most of these festivals, theatrical competitions where playwrights would write different plays, and then the actors would act them out, and you'd have just like multiple days of watching plays. And then it was a competition, so the best one would win. And Colin kind of talked about how then the winner gets a little thing devoted to them, which is nice. I mean, bragging rights, So the festival at Linnaea was a little bit smaller, at least in tragedy. They would only have two tragedy authors competing. But it was still pretty similar in comedy to what happens with the Dionysia in both rural and country. And actually, Greek tragedy originated from the worship of Dionysus. So the Dithrium in honor to Dionysus, according to Aristotle and his Poetics. So those is kind of like a hymn to Dionysus, which is often sung by the satyrs. And Aristotle says that that's where we get the genre of Greek tragedy. And he actually says that, unfortunately, we don't really know what happened with comedy, again, in his Poetics. But so then he goes on, and it's speculated that the satyr plays, which are kind of like parody plays, I guess, that would happen during these festivals, and they would be more fun and lighthearted, and they would go with the theme of the other plays that the playwright had written, and kind of they'd be almost a mocking of them, kind of. And so you would have satyrs in that, and so it's speculated that the satyr plays are the remnants of the hymns to Dionysus, and how theater kind of started as a worship of Dionysus. So we can kind of move on now. I think up next is attendance, maybe. So we'll go ahead and take 2 minutes for attendance, and then Darcy can talk more about the rural and the city Dionysia. And it's pink today.
Okay, let's go ahead and move forward, and we'll talk a little bit about the Dionysia festival, both the rural and the city festival. So the rural Dionysia really came first, both historically and annually. So it was celebrated around the winter solstice, and this is sort of when the new grapevines were planted. So there's kind of a connection there between grapes itself and this festival. So Pong kind of talked already about the city of Euripides, which is a rural village that's outside of Athens, but connected to the city. So during the rural Dionysia, a procession would go through the city, and men would carry these giant like phalluses basically through the city. And then there would be women singers and revelers and dancing, and sounds like it would be a great time. There were phallus cakes. I know that's a big surprise. We haven't really seen that before anywhere, have we? So see them here too at this festival. And then they would also process through the town with this representation of Dionysus. And then we also have, Julianne kind of noted the dithyrambs, these special songs that were composed and sung. And then we would also see a goat being sacrificed. So then after this, let's go ahead and move forward to the next slide. We see the city Dionysia. So once Anthesteria was incorporated into Attica and into this region where Athens was, the city of Athens itself started celebrating the city Dionysia. And this would have been around the spring solstice. So just a couple of months after these rural Dionysia, we start to see the city Dionysia. Oddly enough, we've got another procession going through town, more phallus carriers, more phallus cakes, more reveling and just general merriment. And then after the procession, like Julianne was saying, we start to see these competitions. So they would have just singing and dancing, and then also they would have these dramatic performances. So the Bacchae, which you guys read for this week, this would have been one of these performances. And usually they would have had, I think, 3 different authors all competing for the honor of the greatest set of plays. So 5 days of this festival would have been set aside for these theatrical performances. Tragic writers would have competed with a trilogy, so they would have written 3 different plays that would have gone kind of one on one day, and then the next day, and then one on the day after that. And then they would also have these satyr plays, like Julianne was talking about, which were a little bit lighter and not as thought-provoking and hard-hitting. Often these trilogies were very political, so it kind of brought the democracy into the citizens' hands as well, and really made them think about some of the major issues that were happening. For example, the Bacchae was written during the time of the Peloponnesian War, so Athens was embroiled in this really complicated situation with Sparta. But anyways, I digress. So then later we get the comedies incorporated as well. So there would have been, depending on the time, 3 to 5 different comedic authors that were competing in the comedy festival. And same thing, it also could be very political and very uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of these prominent citizens to be put on display in these comedies and really, be up there center stage and have everybody laughing at them. But hey, that's democracy, right? So then on the final day of the festival, there would have been another procession, more phallus cakes, just letting you know. And then the winners would have been awarded. So let's go ahead and move forward and talk a little bit about the origins of the word tragedy. So the first award for a theatrical performance was presented to this guy named Thespis, and he's where we get our word thespian for actor, and his prize was a goat. So maybe, nobody is really sure where the word tragedy comes from, but there's some speculation that it comes from the word goat, which in ancient Greece is tragos, and song or ode, which is oida. So goat song, basically. So, all right, let's pass this over to Katie and we'll talk a little bit about the Bacchae.
All right, so you guys read just a little bit of Euripides' Bacchae, just the very beginning of the play, which sets up the whole situation, but it really just spirals out of control from there and gets pretty violent. So our important characters in this play are going to be Dionysus, obviously. He's sort of like the main focus, the reason that this entire situation is happening. We have Tiresias and Cadmus. Cadmus, if you remember, is the mythological founder of Thebes, which is the city in which this takes place. And that's pretty relevant because Thebes is a city where a lot of bad things happen. You might be familiar with the story of Oedipus, which also takes place in Thebes a little later, generationally. Tiresias, as is always his role in these sorts of things. He's the blind prophet. He shows up, tells people what's what, like maybe you shouldn't be disrespecting the gods, and then terrible things wouldn't happen to you. But of course, nobody listens to him, and everything goes horribly wrong from there. Pentheus is the grandson of Cadmus, so he's part of this line of rulers who are supposed to be in charge of Thebes. His problem is that he refuses to believe that Dionysus is a deity, which we'll get into a little more on the next slide. Agave is his mother, who has the same opinion, and then we have the Maenads, who Agave is a part of, and they are this group of worshippers of Dionysus, and you can see one over here on the white ground kylix. The Maenads are just, they're women. They hang out in the woods. They have their thyrsi, which are staffs that have vines wrapped around them and a pine cone on the end. They wear animal pelts, typically from animals that they have caught and killed with their bare hands. And they weave snakes into their hair. It's there's a lot going on there in terms of fashion innovation. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So the issue that is happening in this play, Dionysus explains at the very beginning. You probably remember Dr. Rob talking about Simile and how Dionysus is her son. So what happens here is Dionysus comes to visit the city, like his homeland sort of, and he's like, hey, I'm Dionysus, I'm Simile's son, this is who I am, I'm also the son of Zeus, so I'm a deity, and y'all should worship me because that's just what you do. Pentheus refuses to believe that Dionysus is a deity. He's like, this could not possibly be true because Simile was immortal. Even if Dionysus actually is her kid, like he can't possibly also be the child of Zeus. That's just ridiculous. So he's a fake and a pretender, and he's just making all the people in my city crazy, and I just want him out of here. Cadmus and Tiresias know that you don't screw around with the gods, so they're going along with this. They're doing part of the worship. They are the only people in the city doing this because all of the women are not in the city, and they are actually in the woods because Dionysus has decided that they all are Maenads now. And so that's what they're doing. And the rest of the men have gone with Pentheus because he's sort of a de facto ruler. And yeah, so we have this gender divide going on. Dionysus, who is like obviously still trying to get vengeance for this entire situation, comes up with this extremely intricate plan where he disguises himself as a mortal, shows up and pretends to be a worshiper of himself. And Pentheus is like, you have caused all of these problems. You're a part of this, so I'm going to kill you. But some farmers, or he manages to escape the first punishment, and some farmers arrive and they're like, there's a bunch of women in the woods. They're running around. They're like, they killed his oxen. They just ripped them apart with their bare hands. They're like attacking the cities. They're stealing metal for some reason. They're stealing babies. The villagers were unable to fend them off. Like all of these women just like fought them off with their staffs, and they just went back into the mountain. And so these herdsmen are like, this is a problem. Somebody please deal with this. So Pentheus is like, okay, I'll get an army and I'll go and I'll just kill them all, which is an interesting plan considering it's half of the population of his city, but that's what he wants to do. And the disguised Dionysus convinces him that like, hey, you should go do some recon, do a little bit of spying before you do this, but you should be in disguise. So somehow he gets Pentheus to agree to this. And Pentheus dresses up as a Maenad, and they go into the woods. And Dionysus is like, oh, you should climb a pine tree to get a really good view of this situation. So he does, because he has no sense of self-preservation. I don't know what the situation is there. And Dionysus immediately calls out to the Maenads, and he's like, look, Pentheus is here, and he's like spying on you. You should attack him. And so they run up, and they get him down from the tree, and they rip him to pieces. And this is including his mother and his aunts. They're all there as well, ripping him to pieces. They are convinced that he is in fact a mountain lion, which doesn't really explain why they've just decided to rip a mountain lion apart with their bare hands. But they're in the throes of Dionysian madness. So they do that. They go back to the city, and they're like, wow, look at this. I killed this lion. And they're holding up his disembodied head as a prize. And Cadmus is like, this is not good. This is your child. And she's like, oh, that's bad. So Dionysus obviously ends up winning that particular situation. I mean, with the death of his greatest denier. Agave and her sisters are sent into exile. Cadmus and his wife are turned into snakes. And he just leaves the city, and he's like, okay, I'm off to do something else. I hope you all have learned your lesson. So let's go on to the next slide. We're running a little short on time, so I think we'll only talk about one of these questions. So let's go with the second one. How do you guys think that this play and this sort of gender division might reflect the fears that men had about women who were participating in these sort of Dionysian cults? Crickets in the chat. Oh, here's some answers. Okay, maybe that women would overpower men. It's against the social norms. Women might realize that they don't need men. They're the embodiment of chaos, a connection to Pandora, a lack of responsibility and freedom that they couldn't find in the city. They might rise against them and seek to take control for themselves. Yeah, these are all really good. Yeah, it's sort of a subversion of just like the typical societal norms. And I think you guys are definitely right that there's like some sort of sense of, well, if the women just leave and they're just hanging out in the woods, like what are we going to do? How are we going to control them if they just decided to go live out there and now they're stealing all of our stuff? So yeah, I mean, thanks guys for all of your great answers. I'll pass it back to Dr. Rob for some closing arguments.
All right, closing arguments. I don't know if I have any closing arguments. That was wonderful. Sorry to cut your time short again. Great job, TAs. Wonderful stuff as usual. Great job, students. Start studying for the midterm next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and we will see you all on Monday. Bye, everyone.